Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to Team APS, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys 10 Yu-Gi-Oh decks that you can build that don't use the extra deck. So why am I making a video like this? Because ever since Master Rule 4 kind of kicked in, I mean even before then, there are people who just simply don't want to be bothered by the extra deck. Xyz summoning, fusion summoning, synchro summoning, like link summoning, so many crazy wild summoning mechanics, and then you have to deal with the way that the extra monster zones work, and maybe you don't want to play with all of that. If that's your preference, that's fine. In fact, I'm here to help. So all of these decks can be played, completely competently without an extra deck. Some are even best played without an extra deck. That said, of course, with a lot of these decks, you could add one in. If you feel like you want to have one or two kind of like emergency monsters to go into in the extra deck, that's totally cool, but these decks can be played without them, so it should be great for those of you who are looking for it. All right, let's hop in. Deck number one, Kosmos. So this is definitely an easy one that comes to mind because Kosmos, effectively their ships, the big monsters, are kind of their extra deck monsters. The way that Kosmos work, if you don't know, is that they've got pilots and they've got ships. The pilots are these lower level psychic type monsters that have their own effects that are cool, but their big shared effect is that they can banish themselves from the field and special summon their big ships, which are dark machine monsters or light machine monsters, and they get summoned from the hand. The ships, of course, have powerful effects like, they can't be targeted, or they pop cards, or, just something like that. They float when they die. The Kosmos strategy is really cool because it actually wouldn't be very good at most extra deck summoning things anyway. Like all the monsters have different levels, so you aren't really able to Xyz summon, and even synchro summoning is pretty tough because they don't have like built-in tuners. So Kosmos work perfectly fine on their own. It's a very self-contained strategy, but it works well because you've got the equivalent to, having like a scrap dragon or like a stardust dragon or that type of thing with the effects of your ships. Dark Destroyer pops a card and can't be targeted. Forerunner actually gives you life points. A Dark Lady, for instance, can like negate monster effects. So you've got a lot of things and you don't really have to worry about making extra deck stuff. If you want to, you can, but I mean, even with an extra deck, Kosmos rarely go into it, so I think that this is a pretty easy pick. Second deck is Monarchs. So Monarchs, I think, are like kind of a no-brainer. They really popularized the not using an extra deck strategy. So if you don't know, Monarchs got their own structure deck a couple of years back, and the point of a lot of the cards in it are that you can't have cards in your extra deck to use them. So a lot of cards like, March of the Monarchs and Monarchs Erupt and Domain of the Monarchs, which is their field spell that ironically like stops extra deck summons from your opponent, those all require that you don't have cards in your extra deck. And so of course you're thinking, well, there must be strong main deck monsters, and there are. You've got Erebus, you've got Ether, they're your key boss monsters. You've also got the small versions of them that can like summon them out from the deck and like search them really easily. And the Monarch support cards alone are really powerful. You've got search power, you've got a built-in skill drain. I already mentioned the field spell, that does a great job just on its own. So you can, this deck was really kind of defined by being the anti-extra deck. Like it hurts people who use extra decks if you're facing them. So Monarchs, very easy inclusion in this list. It's fun, it's consistent, it's cheap. Maybe it needs a few cards off the ban list, but it's still a really great, easy inclusion here. Number three is Infernal Aids. So I think that this one's kind of easy as well. Infernal Aids basically are a deck of monsters that they summon themselves from your hand by banishing Infernoid monsters in your graveyard. And so the idea, of course, is that you want to mill a lot of cards in the grave, namely some Infernoids, and then like start banishing them so that you can summon them out to the field, like back or whatever from your hand and all that. And that's it. They have small ones that do simple things like, it can pop a spell or trap, or it can pop a monster in the field. They don't have great stats or anything, but they all share the ability to tribute themselves to banish one of your opponent's cards in their grave. With the small ones, that's helpful. With the big ones, though, is where you get some of the really powerful effects like field nuking and being able to attack twice. And it's so cool because the mechanic here almost is designed to not let you do a lot of extra deck summoning, because you can't summon Infernoids if the total level of monsters on your field is higher than 8. So you can't really use like synchro monsters and that type of thing. You can use Xyz to sort of get around some of it, but yeah, it's not really meant to like do extra deck stuff. That said, they do have a fusion monster in Tierra, but it's not really even used in most builds. You can use it kind of with like Elder Entity Instance, like get some pops and stuff. But the main point of the deck is that it functions totally fine without that. Deck 4 is a fan favorite, the infamous True Draco deck. So you either love this deck or you hate it, but you can't deny that this deck is probably the most recent meta-relevant deck that just doesn't involve using the extra deck. It makes use of Monarchs Erupt from the Monarch deck, so you can't really have one, but again, all the main deck monsters kind of do the job of boss monsters. They get you advantage, they get searches from your deck, and then you have Dragonic Diagram, which vastly improves the deck's consistency and beefs up the monsters, making them hard to deal with, protecting them from battle once. And then you just got all this consistency. You got Card Demise, you've got Pot of Desires, you've got Pot of Duality, and of course like the Terraforming and Diagram combo, plus like Disciples of the Draco Phoenix and True Draco Heritage getting you more and more draws. This deck can like quickly get overwhelming when it starts going, and it also runs an annoying gamut of like, floodgate trap cards, so Rivalry and Goes In, and just any trap that's problematic for your opponent, this deck has it. Even though its biggest boss monster, Masterpiece, isn't around, this deck still gets results, so that should speak to the power of it, and again, no extra deck required. Next deck's a bit of a classic, it's Gravekeepers. So they actually did recently get some new support in Soul Fusion. If you're interested in that, you should definitely pick them up, it's very affordable. Gravekeepers are an anti-meta strategy. It's Necro Valley, it's Royal Tribute, it's a bunch of just kind of like stunning monsters with good stats, especially when they get the 500 attack and defense boost from Necro Valley. You have Commandant, you have, basically ways to search your Necro Valley, Descendant to pop your opponent's cards, or Guard to bounce them, Spy to get advantage, Headman and Recruiter to do like searching and recycling. The deck is totally fully functioning on its own, and then when you add in its support trap cards, in particular like Imperial Tomb, you can start just like stopping your opponent from doing anything, and you don't really have to use the extra deck. Like some of the others in this list, they actually have extra deck monsters. They've got like a fusion monster or two, Shaman, and the other new one. They're not great. Most people don't really use them. You'd want to have them in your extra deck in case, but you're not really going to be making it, so this deck's an easy one, especially if you like anti-meta stun strategies. Next deck's a personal favorite of mine, it's Subterrors. So this is the infamous flip effect deck that still needs one last card in Subterror Guru, but I'll digress from that point. Subterrors are really big monsters, but the goal is to kind of like have them face down and then flip them face up, and when they're flipped, they have really strong effects. Umastrix banishes cards, Stalag Mode like discards one card and draws two. They all have really powerful effects like this. They can like destroy monsters, deal damage, that kind of thing. They have big stats. They've got a field spell in the Hidden City that they can use to search all their monsters and independently flip them up and down. You've also got the Subterror Nemesis monsters that have effects like search. There's like Hunter and there's like Archer. And what I like about this strategy is that it combines well with a lot of other strategies. You can use the extra deck here and there if you want, but because of the boss monsters in deck that are so big, it usually doesn't really have to. I mean, they even have their own built-in hand trap. I think of this deck as something that like benefits from having an extra deck, but again, works fine on its own. You can combine it with all kinds of different things, and one of my favorite older variants of the deck was Prediction Princesses, but I've seen this combined with like I've seen it with everything. Next deck's Phantasm Spirals. So this is a fan favorite kind of like budget deck that revolves around normal monsters, namely Phantasm Spiral Dragon, and its assortment of equip spells and trap cards. So the equip spells can equip to a normal monster and give it some small attack boost or whatever, and then when it battles or destroys a monster in battle, then it's able to usually summon another monster from the deck, Phantasm Spiral Dragon, re-equip to that, and then it usually gets another attack. It's a really strong, simple strategy, and you use it with vanilla monsters that have like 1900 or 2000 attack points, for instance. And then you've got the trap cards that you can activate from your hand while you control a normal monster. So they give you the ability to like negate effects, change attack and defense, pop things straight from your hand, like they're hand traps, literally. And then you've got Phantasm City, which is the field spell that gives you a free token, counting as a normal monster, of course, anytime that you like summon monsters to your field. It's pretty wild. I like this deck because it's very simple, but it's actually very effective, and it encourages you not to make extra deck stuff because extra deck monsters are effect monsters, and in order to use your hand traps and in order to use Phantasmal City, you literally can't like summon effect monsters that turn. so you get rewarded for not doing so. And then you get to tech in fun things like Skill Drain and Heat Wave that make it even harder for your opponent to play. So again, if you're looking for a good anti-meta strategy, especially a good budget one, this is definitely a good place to look. Then there's cubics. So Alex likes Phantasm Spiral, so I figure I should also give Trell some credit here. He's the cubic lord, so to speak. The cubic deck is something that I think a lot of people sleep on. It's a powerful OTK deck, to be honest. So Crimson Nova is the boss monster, and your goal really and truly is kind of just to get him out and just start swinging. He can get multiple attacks in, and at the end of the turn that he was summoned, both players take 2,000 points of damage. All you have to do is get your opponent to less than 2,000 with his attacks, and then it's like boom. He's even unaffected by like weak monsters like effects that have like less attack than him. So this is like a built-in, Synchro or Xyz monster. You don't have to really worry about the extra deck. And the deck's consistent. It's got loads of ways to search your monsters, things like Duza to send your spells and traps to the grave that, those spells and traps can banish themselves from the grave and like search more like cubic monsters. And it's kind of like, I guess when I say this deck is slept on, I feel like it really has powerful OTK potential, and you can tech in different engines and stuff, but you never really find yourself making extra deck monsters unless you choose to. So I thought it would be a really easy inclusion on the list. Then there's Shino Birds. So what makes this deck unique is that it's actually a combination of ritual monsters and spirit monsters. So two kind of underrepresented things in Yu-Gi-Oh combine to make something beautiful, because you've got two powerful ritual monsters. There's Shino Baron Peacock and Shino Baroness, and they have two similar effects. So basically when they're ritual summoned, they can like bounce cards or spin spells and traps or whatever on the field back into the deck. And after the turn that they get ritual summoned, they bounce back to your hand, but then they summon two tokens out. You can use the tokens, of course, as your ritual like fodder for the next turn. And then it combines well with existing spirit support. Things like Nikitama, things like Aratama work really well here. They're wind monsters, so there's a lot of wind support that you can use with this deck as well. And it kind of, the Shino Baron monsters function as their own bosses. You don't have to have an extra deck if you don't want to. And that's kind of the beauty of it. In addition to, it's a really low price tag. Like all this stuff is common, so it's really easy to get. And final deck on the list is Dark Lords, a deck that ironically is actually getting a Link monster in the future sometime, but other than that, it does not revolve around any extra deck stuff. These are giant dark fairies that all share the ability to use their own spell and trap cards from the graveyard and then shuffle them back in the deck. It's a powerful effect because it means you avoid paying costs on the spells and traps, which is cool, and you also avoid like once per turn restrictions on them. And the monsters have huge stats. Plus you've got things like Dark Lord Ixchel that make for great draw power. You have things like Dark Lord Superbia that can summon another Dark Lord monster from your grave. They can pretty quickly make their way onto the board and just use their big stats to literally swing over things your opponent has. And if there's anything problematic, then you can just use their spell and trap cards from your grave to, take control of opponent's monsters, negate their monsters' effects, pop them, and also get free searches or free special summons, because that's what the spell and trap cards do. The deck is surprisingly consistent. It's got a lot of draw power. It can run, Allure of Darkness, Trade-In, Pot of Desires, and extra stuff like that, of course, too, if you want. It's actually a really powerful deck. I enjoy playing with it, and even though it's getting a Link monster soon that kind of helps, it never has really needed one before, so unless you want to add a few extras in, Hope Harbinger or something, you don't really have to. And that is the 10 Yu-Gi-Oh decks that you can play without an extra deck. So I'm sure I missed a few. Let me know down in the comments which ones you would have liked to see, but hopefully this list was helpful for those of you who don't have time to do all that extra summoning noise. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. And without further ado, I will see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.